Hi guys, and welcome to our English 9 Essay 1 instructions. We're talking about English 9 and our first essay. There are 2 essays in this class. This one is essay 1 out of 2. So you go into our Unit 1 folder, into Essay 1 folder, and that's where we're talking today. So the first thing that we're looking at in our Essay 1 folder is the writing prompt. This is where you find your information about what you're actually supposed to be doing. Then there's 2 brainstorming steps that help you prepare for the essay. Then there's your rough draft, finally, the final draft. So starting with our instructions, we have the writing prompt, write a nonfiction narrative. So instead of a true essay, we are having a nonfiction narrative as the essay. It is very similar to the final text that we just read, the one called American History, about the girl Elena and how she experiences JFK's assassination and remembers that day clearly, but she remembers it not because of the assassination so much as the rejection she felt for being Puerto Rican when Eugene's mom refuses to let her see Eugene and tells her to end her relationship with Eugene. So a nonfiction narrative is just that, and here are the instructions. You've read an essay, an excerpt from a nonfiction book, and a short story that deal with the issues of American identity. In A Quilt of a Country, remember that's the essay. It's written shortly after September 11. Author Anna Quindlen explores how well the United States holds the many together as one. Her main idea was that we are all different, but we're unified under the belief that we are all created equal. That's part of the American identity. We're different, but we're joined together. Then, in The Immigrant Contribution, which is published in 1958, the then Senator JFK explains how immigrants contributed to the country. So his focus on American identity is that we are all from somewhere else, and that is important because we all come together to work together. Again, going back to that idea of equality, that spirit of equality as he mentions. Finally, in American History, the narrative describes how a personal experience of discrimination overshadowed her grief on the day in 1963 when Kennedy was assassinated. So all 3 of these excerpts have discussed the idea of the American identity from different perspectives. Yours is going to copy the style of the third one, American History, and tell your own story. So the assignment, which is in the box here, is to think about how these other authors have talked about American identity, to consider the idea of how American identity has changed over time, which is the question you've been answering for every text. Then, this underlying part is the key for you for what the assignment is. Use your own experience or that of someone you know or have studied to write a brief narrative that explores this question. How does your generation define what it means to be an American today? Remember, at the very beginning of this course, we began with talking about words that we thought defined American. And we had some classic American terms like independent and liberty and justice, those kind of things. But we also got into some more contemporary things, social media, Facebook, Twitter, those things are American. Also, Macintosh and Apple. And what am I trying to say? Microsoft. Those are all American companies too. So we see there's a lot of things that contribute to being American today. We've brought up Black Lives Matter. We have brought up our President Trump. These are different angles from which we can view America. So your job is to pay attention to our generation's version of America and use your own experience or that of someone you know or have studied to write a brief narrative that explores the question. So your narrative, the short story that you're writing, preferably about your life because it's true, it's easier to draw from your own memory, but it could be from someone else's. How does your generation define what it means to be an American today? So, you're writing a short story. The short story is your story, but you're going from the angle of what does America look like? What does it mean to be American? So the elements of a nonfiction narrative are here. It includes specific elements including clearly describe situation or problem. Choose an event that didn't happen for a very long time, maybe a maximum of 15 minutes. You don't want to tell a long story here. You just want to focus on a moment so that you can have dialogue and sensory details. You can mention all 5 senses, and that way you keep it interesting and focused. You don't want to tell a long story here. You also want a well-structured logical sequence of events. Think about that plot mountain that you learned as a kid where you go from beginning up the rising action to the climax, the falling action. In our case, we're going to want to have the beginning, which is our basic situation where we talk about characters and setting, going up through different conflicts to get to the climax. And our resolution is key here in the falling action. Our resolution is where you reflect and you share what you've learned about the American identity. Details that show time and place. You're also going to need effective story elements, like I mentioned, dialogue, description, those sensory details, and reflection at the end. Again, a reflexive conclusion. That includes your thoughts, feelings, or views about the significance of events. So what occurred? What does that show about America? What does that show about you as an American? And then finally, make sure you correct your grammar. Capital I's, capital first letter of each sentence. Don't forget your periods, your commas. When you're quoting somebody, use quotation marks, that kind of thing. If you want a model narrative, you are also welcome to look at Music for My Mother. That's the first text that we read. That is also a narrative. That one's very nice because it goes full circle. It starts with the girl who's writing, and it talks about her brother playing the songs in Spanish that are 100 years old, to how her parents experienced the move to the United States, to how she and her brother experienced the move to the United States, to finally how she wants her son, who has grown up in the United States, to learn those Spanish songs from hundreds of years ago from her brother. So it's like going full circle from the beginning to the end. And that's one of the structures you can use. So back to Essay 1, that is the prompt. That is what you are writing about. Step 1 helps you plan. This is when you come up with 5 examples that you've either experienced life as an American or did something American. Here are some examples for you. Might be you experienced help in our healthcare system, experience with the court system, experience with the police. Those are all very American things. Our police, our court, and our healthcare are different than in other countries. It also might be a family holiday, for example, Thanksgiving or 4th of July, which are very specific to America. It also might be that you've traveled somewhere in the U.S. and saw that the U.S. looks different in other places. For example, both my parents are from New Jersey. I grew up in Colorado. So when we go visit New Jersey, I would notice all these differences. Another one you might think of is that if you've traveled outside the USA and maybe you missed part of American culture, maybe you missed what it looked like here. Or another example is you've left America and you were embarrassed by some things about our culture, and maybe you preferred things in another country's culture. The idea, of course, is to think of 5 events in your life that you could write about and that you could tell a story about, that give an example of what it is to be an American in our generation. So here are some examples for you. Go ahead and read through those. I've given you 5 here. And then once you've read those, you'll, of course, post comments. If your class already has comments posted, you're welcome to look at theirs. Once you have posted your comments, the second step is to post 2 replies to others. And your job is to look at their 5 story options and suggest to them which one you think would be interesting to hear about, or to suggest to them how to share that story. You might say, oh, it'd be really cool if you told this story this way, or it'd be really neat to hear about this event. So come up with your 5 examples, post them here so people can see them, and then as soon as 2 other people have responded, you can give them your replies to get your full points. The next assignment then is to share your narrative plan. Like I mentioned, we have that plot mountain going up and coming down. This is what these questions 1 through 6 talk about. 1 is thinking about setting. Where does it take place? When does it take place? What are the 5 senses there? The story that I planned is about being in New Zealand during winter season. So I'm going to talk about a time when it was, here's my example, skiers are on the chair with me and my friend Linda's there. Those are the, my bad, I'm looking at the wrong one. That's the next part. It's snowy, cold, and dry. Here's my description for my number 1. So number 2, think about the characters, who is around. Here's my answer for that one. Those are skiers on the chair with me, my friend Linda from Finland. Number 3 is what's the first event? That's when we get on the chairlift. What is the second event? This is going to be before the climax, but getting interesting. This is when I see my friends and yell from the chairlift, I'm being friendly, but I don't realize this is weird in another country, which leads us to the climax, which is the most exciting part. My example is that the New Zealand people say I must be American because I'm so loud. And I'm like, oh, I didn't realize Americans were loud, and also I didn't realize that wasn't normal. And the last one is, how does it end? This is where I reflect on the loudness of Americans. And so this is only a piece of the American identity. It obviously doesn't tell the whole story about what American is and how I view all of America. But these 6 questions help you to guide how you're going to structure your narrative. So after you get through both of those, oh, and that one's another one that you post by writing it as a comment so other people can see your 6 and learn from you. Get an example of what someone else is doing. The next step, not the last step, but the next step is to write a rough draft. These are the same bullet points that we had from the beginning when we talked about what to have in this narrative. Here's the example narrative that I've written based on the planning that my example has been throughout these. And I notice how only a few of the paragraphs look like essay paragraphs. Most of them are short because they're storytelling, right? A narrative is where you can share dialogue, you can share description, as opposed to writing full sentences. So mine starts with a time. It sets the setting. I have dialogue where I yell. I have sound effects, bam. I have more dialogue. I'm yelling a lot. And I have conversations going on between 2 different people, talking back and forth. That's most of it. And then at the end, I have my comment, and then I'm thinking about what has happened. So this is the structure of mine. Feel free to read through that so you have an example. That's our rough draft. After we write the rough draft and post that, I'll give you guys feedback, and of course you'll be able to read through it and make changes of your own. And the final assignment for the essay 1 then will be the final draft. This one I have edited from the rough draft. I've added certain things for clarity, and these are the specific things I've changed. So that is all for essay 1. That's the whole plan. Again, you will have different dates set up here for your class so that it will be clear what due dates you have, and that's the assignment. Feel free to email me with questions and go ahead and get started. After you read the writing prompt on your own, go ahead and do step 1. Write that down and write your 2 replies once other people have posted 2. After you get all 4 steps done, you're rocking it. Don't forget, our essay is worth 30% of our grade. It is a different category than all your other assignments. All your other assignments go in the classwork category. This is the essay category worth 30%. Classwork is worth 40%. So if you miss this assignment, these 4 assignments in here, your grade's going to get hit hard. On the other hand, if you do them well, shoot, you're going to have a killer grade by the time we have parent-teacher conferences. All right, guys, have a wonderful day. Bye.